The next Enlightenment philosopher I'd like to talk about is Jean-Jacques Rousseau. Parlez-vous français? Jean-Jacques Rousseau. Jean-Jacques Rousseau. Rousseau is French, and a lot of Enlightenment philosophers came from France. Locke comes from England, where Rousseau comes from France. The French Enlightenment philosophers tend to be a little bit more radical, a little bit more towards, have a bias more towards violence if necessary, where the English are more towards altering. But the idea of altering or abolishing the government was pretty much accepted on both sides of the Enlightenment argument. The question is, which is more effective? And Jean-Jacques would probably lean more towards the violence may be necessary. And we're going to explain why he thinks you can alter or abolish the government if necessary. So in his book called The Social Contract, Jean-Jacques Rousseau describes how people and government should work together. Now, anybody that's in the law or wants to be a lawyer, there's one thing you have to understand about contracts. There's no such thing as a one-sided contract. It doesn't exist. The idea that you get in a contract is that both parties, both people, or both groups, or both teams, or whatever, both people that are engaged in this contract, and actually it could be more than two, all people that are involved in this contract get something from it. So you wouldn't sign a contract with your boss that says, and you want to be a news reporter, that if you ever lie, they can fire you. But if you're accused of, but on the other hand, if you're accused of something, they should support you, and you didn't actually, or say if you're in media, they're trying to make you testify against one of your sources, the media might say, you're going to back them up. That's part of the contract. Yes, you can't lie or exaggerate things, but also as that company, they're going to back you up. I guess a better example would be something like a house. So if you buy a house, you sign a contract. Now on one side it says the people that are selling you the house, so you might have to fix the deck because the deck's breaking, or they need to paint the house, or the house gets a new roof. But on the other side, you may have to pay more money, or you may do something that they want. So you might move in 2 weeks earlier than you planned on to make them happy. Contracts are two-sided. Whenever a union gets in a contract with a company, it's because they want maybe better pay, but then the company might say, well, we can't pay as much for your health care, and they have to come to some kind of agreement. Make sure that whenever you do a contract with somebody that you write it down. That's super important. Now, social contract, however, is not written down. It's well known. So it's something that's agreed between a society and their government. A social contract is the idea that government is created to serve the people and protect our liberties. So if you're a social contract theorist, which I am, obviously, I think it's a great system. The government is actually created to serve us, and we're a part of the government. And that's where the republic and this idea of democracy, or direct democracy sometimes, comes into play. The government are elected officials to serve our needs. We don't exist for the government exists to help us. However, in a social contract, you still have responsibilities to the government. So in America, for example, we have duties, which are required things that we have to do to help the government. Like jury duty is probably the easiest example. It's actually called jury duty. In jury duty, you actually have to go to court and judge the actions of one of your peers. Somebody that's an American are accused of a crime in America and determine whether or not they're innocent and guilty based on the evidence. And you're supposed to be impartial. You're supposed to be part of an impartial or unbiased jury. Okay? And I really like this idea that people are going to either support, or if there's strong evidence against me, I'm probably going to go to jail. And if there isn't, then the people will probably hopefully see the truth of the idea. Serving in the military in times of war. Those are duties. Those are things that may be required of you. Okay? Paying taxes is a duty. However, responsibilities are things like voting. I think voting is probably one of the most important responsibilities you have in this social contract with the government. If you don't vote and you complain, it really bothers me as a history and government teacher, because I don't understand. How are you going to have any power if you refuse to be a part of the system? And Jean-Jacques Rousseau says you either need to change or alter, which would be voting, would be firing the guys you don't like, or hiring the guys you want in government, or to actually abolish, which would be revolution. And I don't think that most people think you actually need to have a revolution every year, because people could actually die or get hurt from this. And these are real sudden changes, which are probably not good for everybody overall, unless the government is really extremely doing wrong things. So in the case of the French government, they felt that the king really had misused all their powers. While people are starving, Louis XIV built essentially a palace. They spent half the money on this Palace of Versailles in France, and people didn't even have enough bread to eat. So, and the irony is that Louis XIV didn't really pay any consequences for this. His grandchildren were executed for what he had done. Okay, liberty is a very, very important idea too. So in this social contract, you have what's called liberty, not freedom. So one thing that bothers Mr. Metropoulos as a political science student and a government teacher, political science member, and civics and American government are the same thing, is this idea that people misuse the term liberty and freedom pretty regularly. People say we have freedom of speech. Not really sure you do. You have what's called liberty of speech. People say you're free to do what you want. You'll even see presidents, you'll see politicians especially, they'll use the term freedom all the time. You're free to do this, you're free to do that. Here's the kicker though. You're not actually free. Freedom is the idea that you could do whatever you want, whenever you want. So like, for example, with your parents. You probably have a lot of liberty with your parents, but you're not free. So the idea that you could take the car out and go to a place where you tell your parents, that's pretty much a liberty issue. They're giving you the freedom to use the car up to a certain extent, but then they're going to cut you off. You can't just get in the car and drive to Los Angeles tomorrow. Your parents would freak out. Now, in terms of government liberty, the way I like to picture this physically is envision yourself, put your hands together, and then spread your arms as far as you can. Now, as long as you're not touching or affecting anyone else, that's your liberty. Those are the things you can do that you want to, as long as they don't affect other people. That's liberty. Freedom is the idea that you could reach your arms and smack somebody. So as long as you're not hitting or smacking or hurting anybody else, those are your liberties. The question is, what are those liberties? And it gets really, really complicated because when you get older, you realize the things we really do now affect other people. So for example, you have the liberty to drive a car, but if you really think about what a car is, it's a 2,000 pound or 5,000 pound weapon. It could quickly turn into something that could kill or hurt other people. And if you're not prepared and you're not driving safely because you're texting, you could really hurt somebody. And you could infringe on their liberties and their rights. So you have freedom and liberty and rights within as far as you affect other people. And it gets very heavily debated on what are those liberties. What do we do that just affects ourselves? And a lot of times we find out pretty much everything we do affects other people. So at what part does the government step in and say, hey, you can't do that? And if you do go 100 miles per hour on a highway, we're going to give you a fine. You can even go to jail because that's reckless endangerment of other people's lives. But if you're driving the speed limit, you can drive whatever you want in America. You have the liberty to go wherever you like in America, and we don't have a problem with that as long as you're going the speed limit. So those are things to think about. Liberty, not freedom. So watch out when you have people saying, oh, you have the free. No, you don't. You have liberty. And there's a big debate on what liberties you should have that should be checked by the government. So freedom of speech should really be called liberty of speech. You can't say whatever you want. You can't threaten to kill people. And maybe you disagree with that because it does say freedom of speech. Maybe, and that's a debate to some degree. Now, when we have liberty of the government, it protects our natural rights. So some of our liberties, the reason we have liberty is to protect our rights. So the right to life. So you can't kill somebody. That's a liberty issue. You can't steal or hurt people's property. This is what John Locke had said. And life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness in Jefferson's case. So if you're infringing on people's happiness, so you're doing things that really wrong people, that could be affecting their natural rights. But that's why we have liberties in the government to protect. So as you see in the picture on the top left, or in the middle left corner, you see the difference between individual liberty and state power. So the question is, what is the balance? And that's a big question. What can we do, the government, before the government has to say, hey, you can't do that, there'll be consequences. And I'm not sure that anybody really wants to live in a society where you're completely free to do whatever you want. Probably the closest examples I could think of in America would be like the Wild West. There was no police. The sheriff might be 500 miles away. If somebody stole your cow, you'd have to pretty much go steal it back. And it wasn't a really orderly system. However, I don't want the government to be too powerful and infringe and actually protect our individual rights. So if the government was too powerful, they might limit our freedom of speech to criticize the government because that really affects the government. If we get up there and say we don't like the president, or we don't like Congress all the time, and they don't like that. They want people to think of them positively, and they want to stay in office for the next election. So those are some issues to think about. Liberty, a social contract, is an agreement between the government and the people. And Rousseau is really, really important in terms of Enlightenment thinkers. And I hope you paid attention, and you have a good day. Thanks for checking in with Mr. Metropoulos and his flip class.